Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Capital Planning Committee of Tuesday, April 20th, 2021. It's 7:05 p.m. I'd like to introduce the board. My name is Harris Blumwald. I am the chair. And if we can, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves to everyone. Davis, will you start for us?
Sure. Davis Healy, representative from the Finance Committee, present.
Jim Condon?
Yeah, Jim Condon, member.
Rupsa, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Rupsa Roy, member.
And Wendy, of course.
And Wendy Nightingale, Finance Director, ex officio and voting member.
Thank you, Wendy. I'd also like to welcome Connor Reed into our Capital Planning Committee. And Connor, since you are going to be speaking on our first agenda item, please feel free to talk about our amendment to the fire department.
Sure. So just a couple of minor adjustments since Chief Partridge was in to present. The first being just an adjustment of the requested allocation for engine 14's replacement that was presented at 700. We are requesting that be adjusted to 750, but just provides a little bit more flexibility as far as spec for the engine. And as this is a borrowing authorization, or would be, if that ends up being overly conservative on the town's part, we would just rescind the difference later and not spend it. So that's the first item. And the second is, you'll see it in a list that was sent to you as department priority ranking item number 3, I believe. Let me pull that spreadsheet up. For fire EMS, utility vehicle with radios. So that, and Chief Partridge included a memo for the committee as well. That was sent with Wendy by the other materials. So this is obviously coming in now rather than earlier because it's associated with an operational change that we hope to make through the fiscal 22 budget, which would create, through a stipended position in the fire department, what the chief and I and the health director are pretty excited about would be a shared kind of cross-department position for what's called mobile integrated health, emergency medical service, and public health officers. So this would be a paramedic or a firefighter within the department who has yet to be assigned, that would receive a stipend and work an administrative schedule and basically formalize the relationship that has grown out of COVID, where if you look at things the town has done, like offering COVID vaccine clinics and things like that, we had to put a lot of the resources and infrastructure in place to make that possible, like getting certified to have the right credentials and state databases for vaccine administration and tracking. And the fire department has obviously been incredible, and a lot of their staff, paramedics, have been really good with that. And you know, this is something the chief and the director for years, including before COVID, said we really should start formalizing the relationship between public health programming, the Department of Health, and the emergency medical response in the fire department. And so that's going to be a change we're making on the operations side. And this is just a vehicle for that position.
So Connor, is this position definitely moving forward for 2022?
It is in the budget that is now balanced. I haven't presented the balanced budget. I will on Monday night to the select board and Wednesday next week to the finance committee, but it is included, funding for that stipend is included within the fire department budget. It would be an existing staff member assigned to this role.
Thank you.
And one item worth note, this is more kind of a prioritization discussion, but this vehicle and the associated equipment is listed for $50,000 on your capital list. We would propose doing so through a borrowing authorization because we do think we can capture some grants. There's a lot of federal assistance for COVID related things, and so we think we could probably leverage grants for some of this. So that's why we would use a borrowing authorization, because then if we end up getting the grants, we don't need to borrow.
Does anyone else have any questions about the position or the vehicle? Seeing none, thank you, Connor. We'll put that in our prioritization list for our second time of a conversation in a bit. All right, and Connor, you're the second one up as well. Yeah, to discuss the fiscal update for the town.
Sure. So I've presented to the Select Board and Finance Committee in some detail the status of the operating budget. So we have a lot to get through tonight, so I wasn't going to re-present that whole thing, and instead just give you a broad overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has. Thankfully, the conversation around the operational budget programming and the town's fiscal shape in general is much more optimistic this year than it was 1 year ago. I actually think capital planning was the last meeting we all had in person. I vaguely recall, I think it was March 10th, the night that the emergency was declared by the governor. We were all meeting so long ago. So we, in part because of a kind of artificially depressed baseline, because of how deep we cut last year, are able to make some strategic investments akin to what I just mentioned with formalizing that health relationship between emergency medical services and the health department. There's a couple of other items in there that I think should be of particular interest to the Capital Planning Committee. We will be programming an engineer for the Department of Public Works and Water Division. As you are as aware, if not more than everyone else, DPW has an awful lot of capital project management responsibility during all circumstances. And next year, the next 3 years, it's actually nearly doubling. But we're not doubling the amount of engineers we have for oversight. So we obviously have the DPW director who is an engineer, but has to manage all of the operations, budgeting, personnel. We have an assistant town engineer. So you basically have 2 engineers on staff if you count the management of the department. The last 3 years, they've had responsibility for roughly $25 million of capital. In the next 3, right now, that tallies closer to $50 million. And that could increase in the coming years. 25 million of that alone, which is on your list tonight, is just water treatment plants. So they have a lot of work coming down the pipe. So this would, that's the addition of a staff engineer whose entire job it would be to focus on engineering and project management assistance for public works. A couple of other minor important investments. So in the town clerk's office, we will be adding a half-time clerical person to assist with just managing the expanded voting access that came out of COVID. Some of that is at least through June, this June, here to stay, things like vote by mail. And we anticipate our town clerk is on a lot of state level associations. It seems pretty likely that all the different reforms being considered in Massachusetts all involve some level of expanding early voting and vote by mail permanently. And we obviously want to support those important functions for our residents and voters. So we'll be adding a little bit of staff there to assist. I don't know how many of you folks did early voting in person last year or did vote by mail, but we had to basically turn town hall into a mail center and use an army of poll workers to keep up. And they did a wonderful job, but we want to formalize some of that support because it's going to be necessary every election moving forward. And then there's a couple of minor restorations. We cut a good amount of staff last year. Some were outright eliminations of jobs, and others were cuts from full-time positions to half, where we ended up sharing one person with multiple departments, and that's never an optimal way to do things. And so we would be restoring a couple of half-time to full-time. This sounds like a lot, but in total, it's roughly equivalent to 2 full-time equivalents across the town budget. Which is pretty marginal. So we're looking at probably a 2% increase on the town budget next year, 3% on the schools. We will not be eliminating positions again. Last year, between the town and school budget, 30 positions were eliminated, which is pretty severe. And so we are making some investments in building back, but we're still at a reduced level of personnel. Some of that was planned. We opened SEMREC this year for Regional 911 Dispatch Center. So we dissolved our local dispatch department, which was 9 positions, and those will not be restored because we don't need to do so. We now have that regional center. And that's one of the ways that we're actually able to keep the budget moving in a positive direction. As in prior years, local dispatching costs for personnel and the administrative overhead was roughly $750,000 per year. Next year, our costs, being a member of SEMREC, are $300,000. So that's a pretty substantial savings, let alone for a service that is improved. Has geolocation based on your cell phone when you call, direct 911 from your cell phone to the regional center rather than going to state dispatch to be routed manually. So that's been a positive multi-year investment. We started the work on SEMREC informally a decade ago, and the IMA with the other towns, Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton, was signed 4 years ago. So a lot of work. The chiefs did a ton of it. Public safety personnel did a ton of great work. And so that'll pay some dividends and free up some operational capacity, which is much needed. So overall, it's a level service budget with a few targeted restorations and investments that we kind of have to do in order to keep services functioning at an acceptable level, but a better condition than last year. Similarly, we'll go through prioritization tonight, but Wendy and I do think we'll be able to fund a bit more of a capital budget this spring than last year. Last spring or summer, really, we delayed town meeting till June. We obviously deferred a tremendous amount of capital in the spring. We funded some of it in the fall, but overall was a very, very, very conservative capital budget. This will be slightly improved, but still a lot of the kind of structural challenges that we've had stemming back to the last recession before the COVID recession are still here, and in many ways will be exacerbated further by COVID as we move into the future. We have had and continue to have a structural revenue deficit where we don't have the recurring revenue coming in every year that we need in order to adequately finance even just contractual obligations between our employees, healthcare, pension costs, debt service for capital. And that's largely the result of we had state aid cut pretty dramatically in the Great Recession. It took 8 years to restore back to where it was without adjusting to inflation. Thankfully, in COVID, we didn't have state aid cut. They level funded it, which is a huge improvement from the last time. But the net result is still kind of unchanged. That what was and remains our second largest revenue category has just really underperformed for 13 years now. And that forces an increased reliance on the largest revenue category, which is property tax, as you all know. And so you have a dynamic where folks see their tax bill go up every year, and they hear the town say, well, we don't have enough increased revenue to fund improved services. And they say, well, wait, how is that possible? Where's all that money going? And the truth is that it's unfortunately just offsetting losses in other revenues that simply have not kept up with inflation or the cost of doing business by any reasonable metric. So those challenges are real, they still exist. But because of, again, how deep those cuts were in the operating side for the current fiscal year, we do have some relief that in total, we'll probably use just over $1 million in reserves to balance the budget going into fiscal 22, which is still less than half of what we were doing in fiscal 2016. So our reserve position has improved. Our stabilization fund is in better shape now than it has been ever. So we have some things moving in the right direction. Our bond rating was reaffirmed over the summer by Moody's, which is obviously of interest to this committee. And they actually specifically cited that the town was very conservative or pessimistic almost in its revenue forecast, and that we made some pretty hard choices to reduce our spend to make sure that this spring we're having a conversation about, okay, how can we start to reimagine and build things back? Not, oh, gee, I wish we cut last year, and now we have to cut a bunch now while the economy is starting to grow. So sorry for the word salad, but I'm happy to speak in more specifics or get into some particular numbers if you'd like the bottom line numbers on the total operating budget. With enterprise, we're over 90 million. And again, there's some bright spots, a lot more bright spots this year than last, but there are still structural challenges that make our work pretty tough, and particularly this committee. That you spend most of your time talking about what we can't afford to fund.
Thank you, Connor, for that update. Before I open it up for questions, I just want to let Colin, you showed up a few minutes ago. I'd like to introduce yourself to the rest of the board, if you would.
If I could find the mute button, that would be great. Good evening. As most of you know, Colin McCarthy, been a Easton resident for many years now, and I would say 32 years. And I've been on the capital planning board for a number of years now, and I don't know what else you want me to say, Harris, but
That's perfect, Colin.
that's perfect.
Perfect. And I figured you had a question to start us off anyways.
Oh, yeah, right.
All right. O'Connor, thank you for the update. Yes, I enjoyed your word salad scramble. It was good. So are we still, we're looking at about 35% debt, is that correct, moving forward for 2022 for debt services? 35% of our,
Oh, okay. That's a very good question. That I should have anticipated since you were the capital committee. So our fixed costs, so our debt service is increasing what looks to be quite significant at first glance, right? As you noted, so debt service in fiscal 21 was 4.3 million. So that includes all buckets, right? So you have the exempt debt and the non-exempt debt from town and schools. And next year that will be 5.8 million. So it's an increase of 1.5 million, 35% increase in debt service. The super majority of that, 1.25 million, is the exempt school debt. And so that has a dollar for dollar match in the tax levy that is associated with the Blanche Ames Elementary School. So that's an increase from 1.9 million to 3.17 million. And that's the exempt debt that was authorized by the debt exclusion override by voters in 2019. And so what you're seeing is as this project advances, with construction has now begun. We had the groundbreaking a week ago or two. You're going to see more of that financing come online as the project moves forward. So 1.25 million of that $1.5 million debt service increase is financed on the other side of the ledger. If you look at the if you look at the taxation sheet on the first page, I'm sorry, I'm looking at something you don't have. Our property taxes will go up by a corresponding dollar for dollar match to offset that exempt debt. That's covered in my budget memos online, but I don't know if I answered that as succinctly as I should have. I'm sorry, but the super majority of that 35% debt exclusion is increase is the exempt debt of the school that will be authorized with the tax increase.
thank you, Connor.
I'll send that change memo to the committee too. That includes the summary. And Connor, one thing I also wanted to just touch upon with respect to the budget and revenues not keeping pace in particular when it comes to state aid is the fact that Easton is a minimum aid community, which means that we only get $30 per student as an increase in state funds for Chapter 70 funding every year.
Right.
Which
Yes.
is about $100,000.
Right. Yeah. So that category of revenue for the town is roughly 10 million that we rely on. The schools cost over 40 million to operate. And so every year what we can count on from the state is, as Wendy said, about $100,000 increase. And the $100,000 increase for a $40+ million operation is not remotely sufficient. And so the delta there just gets offset with other revenues, which are overwhelmingly property tax. So, you know, we've done quite a few comparative analyses over the year that show that across almost every category, including education, that we spend fewer dollars per capita than many of our economically comparable communities and school districts. And again, you end up in a situation where people look at their tax bill every year, they're like, what, does this guy know how to do math? My taxes are going up. And he's saying on and up. And again, it's because we have these other dynamics at play that don't necessarily occur in every community. I don't know the number offhand, but less than a majority of school districts in Massachusetts are what are called those minimum aid communities. And so you'll see a lot of coverage, you probably already have, of the much heralded Student Opportunity Act, right? The education reform that was passed that will increase education spending on the state level, which is true. Unfortunately, because of a nuance in the funding formula, none of that goes to Easton. So again, you have a dynamic where people see their tax bill go up, they see news coverage that there's all this education funding on the state level, and then they hear this, and they say, well, that doesn't make sense. And the answer is because of basically nuances in the law. Easton still gets the same minimum increase every year, roughly $100,000 for a $40+ million school district. And so that gets offset with other funds available.
So Connor, why are we a minimum? upgrade committee?
So that is a very complicated question, but and Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, the long and short of it is one way you could interpret it is that the state formula thinks that Easton taxpayers can afford to pay more. Wendy, is that fair? Like, well, it's a really gross oversimplification, but they look at a
Yes.
variety of things like, you know, the relative growth in a community, the relative wealth of the community, the income per capita, the value of land, and they come up with a formula of, you know, what they think communities can afford through other revenues, including taxes. And if they think there's basically slack, for lack of a better term, in those other funding areas, then they only give you the minimum required. So that they then use
They
those.
force our hand to a Prop 2.5 override.
I'm sorry. What was the question?
Going to
Is
look
the
up,
goal to push us towards a Prop 2.5 override to fund all these things?
I mean, functionally, yes. The override is the mechanism built into the municipal finance law for these things. Obviously, we all know that that's a wildly difficult and unpopular way to go about funding things, and it's pretty complex to make an argument to voters of, yes, your taxes are going up and services aren't necessarily being funded at the level we need to because there's this arcane formula somewhere up in Boston that has a municipal growth factor that says you can pay more. But yeah, it's not unfair, Colin, to frame it that way. That, you know, the functional effectiveness is yeah, for minimum aid communities, your choices are make significant investments in infrastructure and zoning to try to spur more growth, which we've done. And before COVID hit, we were, you know, averaging roughly 900,000 to 1 million of new taxable growth a year compared to, you know, 500 to 7, which is an improvement. But, you know, that's not enough to overcome the kind of collective gravity of years and years of stagnant state funding. We're better off than we otherwise would have been. But yes, after a certain point, you know, you could do things on the margins. You could raise fees for permits, you can raise parking fees, but those types of revenues account for roughly 7% of our budget. So you could, you know, double a bunch of fees, which could have a negative economic impact on a variety of permitting and construction, and you might bring in a 6-figure or a low 7-figure number that doesn't fix the fundamental problem. So in the long term, you know, there are things you can do and you have to do, like strategically invest your capital and do things like sewer projects and consider making land use more accessible so that property owners can do more with their property. But yeah, I mean, my opinion, having looked at this for 9 years now, is yes, that's overrides of a mechanism built into the law to address that. But it's obviously that then becomes a political question and not just a purely economic one.
does anyone else have any questions for Connor on our fiscal update?
Yeah, Connor, real quick. I know that I think we had kind of brought it up briefly at the budget hearings, but is there any update on your end on how like the town expects the American Rescue Plan Act money to kind of come through and affect the budget?
Yes, and the short answer is not to affect the fiscal 22 budget. So, which is a good thing, and I'll explain why. So Easton will receive, we still don't know the exact amount because there's nuance in the federal relief bill on some money going to the county government, because in most of the United States, counties provide services, not municipalities. That'll have a big impact on how much Easton actually gets. But more kind of fundamental than that is there will be rules for what is eligible and how it will be spent. And we don't know those yet. No one does. The United States Treasury has to issue those rules. And it's April 20th. They're not out yet. Town meeting's less than a month away. And we anticipate those rules will come out at some point in May, possibly even around town meeting. So we didn't want to bake any assumptions at all into either the operating budget or the capital budget to tap into those funds. And instead are putting budgets forward that we can afford with our own revenue. The good thing about that is that means that we'll have balanced budgets that we can afford no matter what the rules are, and then that gives us more flexibility with those relief funds.
Perfect, thank you. And do you just loose idea, would that be something for like special town meeting in the fall, or would that just be next budget cycle?
No, it's a good question. It may not be something for town meeting at all. CARES money was not subject to appropriation. Right, so ARPA funds may also not be subject to appropriation. We don't even know that. So not only do we not know the rules of like, can you buy this truck versus this shovel? We don't even know the rules for how it gets encumbered and spent. If it's subject to appropriation, then yes, any changes would have to go to town meeting. If it's not, then no, not necessarily. There are upsides and downsides to both. Obviously, things that are not federal money not subject to appropriation comes with usually pretty significant state and federal audit requirements, which is fine. You know, we'll do what we have to do. If the federal government wants to cut us a big check, we are happy to comply with every rule they have. And you can move faster, right? Which town meeting's not famous for. On the flip side, people might not know what the money is being used for. Of course, it wouldn't be a secret. We would tell people at meetings, but your average person doesn't say like, "Oh, it's Tuesday night. I want to see what capital planning is doing." No offense, right? You know, we would need to be creative with messaging on that to make sure that there was like stakeholder input and people understanding what it was going to be for. But the first step for us is just finding out what the rules of a road are.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you, Connor.
No problem.
Thank you, Davis. Anyone else have any questions for Connor on the fiscal update? Seeing none, Connor, we appreciate your update, and I'd like to move forward with our review and prioritization process. Wendy, is it possible to share?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Can you see that spreadsheet?
Yes, we have the spreadsheet up now.
Yep.
Okay.
So I don't know if everyone remembers our process to a degree. Basically, we'll go through the list of descriptions of requests from all the departments and try to prioritize with Connor and Wendy what we want to move forward if possible.
One thing I will just say is that this is not really in any particular order, but typically public safety usually makes it to the top of the list, which is why fire and police are at the top, and then I think it's pretty much alphabetical by department.
Right, and to be clear, so this list hasn't been kind of prioritized internally. What Wendy's referring to is the capital bylaw for the town. That the town's bylaw on capital planning stipulates that items relating to health and safety are the top priority, and then there's a variety of other ones. So
Thank you both.
We don't know them because we rarely make it past the safety tier, the first one.
that is fair. Okay, so
Yes.
Harris, I'm sorry, I'm here to be helpful. So however, it's normally more of a workshop where we're in person, so this is a little more difficult.
Correct. So basically, I figured we take the chunk of the fire and police and make them our top 1 through 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, excuse me. So that was would be engine 14, the SCBA helmet and boot cleaners, the utility vehicle with radio, Fire Station 3 work, the 2 marked police vehicles, the 1 animal control vehicle. Comments?
Harris, can you see us all?
Excuse me?
Can you see everyone on your screen?
I can see Yeah, if everyone, they can speak up, or if you want to, raise your hand, I can definitely see that as well.
I can, I would say as far as ranking 1, 2, I would agree with replacing engine 14, the helmet and boot cleaner for the safety, number 2, and, you know, from there on in, I'm open to suggestions, you know.
Yeah. I see
We
one
said
of these
before,
vehicles.
the police vehicles, we always do.
Yep.
The mileage, and we need them. So I would probably say maybe number 3 there. And then all the other ticket items here, at least within the fire and safety, police and fire, they're all roughly about the same. So I don't, you know, I think the floor refinishing in Station 3 is probably a safety issue because of all the spalling and the concrete work that needs to be done there. I think that was part of that, or I'm mixing 2 different projects together. But
No, you are correct. It was the floor, there was 2 flooring projects. There was that one and the DPW flooring. Both had issues with safety.
yeah, so I'd probably say fire station number 3, floor finishing, be number 4. And then utility vehicle radios, toss up between that and the animal control.
I go to utility vehicles since it's used for public safety pieces of it.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I think I would put, animal control in there, maybe even before the floor finishing. I know in talking to Chief Partridge, that, you know, that was it is a priority, but that was his number 4.
Okay.
The animal control vehicle, in talking to Chief Sullivan, you know, really could use a replacement.
I'm okay with that.
Yep. Any other comments?
Yeah, just to add for the Skiva helmet and boot cleaner, that is something that we are, Wendy and I are thinking of deferring, although we would still like it to be prioritized because we are hopeful that we could try to secure some federal COVID related financial relief to cover that. That doesn't necessarily mean it should change in your ranking, but just keep in mind that that's something that we do feel relatively, at least more than 50% optimistic we can secure grants to cover.
Great.
So,
We like those grants.
Yep. So Wendy, I'd go utility vehicle after animal control. Unless there's anyone else that'd like to chime?
okay, that's good. And then, 6 for the floor.
Yes, please. All right, let's see. What I'd like to do now is probably pick one from each department, the top ranking ones they have. We also, there's also a few that I think we needed to definitely look at was, let's see.
I know for the school, one of theirs was improving the security at one of their entrances.
That was correct. That was entrance security improvements, which is.
I think I passed it.
Yep. Wendy, do we have we don't have any ranking from the school, do we, technically?
Really, the top 2 priorities for the school are the fitness center leak repair, and the entrance security improvements. Those are
I definitely.
those are the top 2.
And that's a safety issue for the leak repair, so I definitely want to put that on there.
So I mean, I would be fine with making that the next number.
Yeah, so it would be
Leak
what,
repair, which is
7?
7.
Yep. Any questions or comments based on that? All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to do this electronically, making sure I'm not seeing anyone. Moving back up, I would say. What about the also for the school, the VC tiles that for flooring issue they were having? remove and install VC tiles that were coming up. It's further down after furniture replacement. RO3, there you go.
Yes, so that is something that they would also like to do. We can prioritize that. They are going to see if they are going to have available funds this year out of their school budget to complete that, as well as a couple of other items. But they should still be in the ranking. They are important to get completed.
I don't know if that would supersede numerous vehicles in public works, particularly if you look at.
No worries.
Just my opinion, but you look at 1988 F-350 for public works. That's pretty.
Yes, we've been trying to replace that for years now.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have an initial fiscal year request on here, but I think it may have gone as far back as like 2014. Because every year there's probably about maybe 6, vehicle or, heavy duty equipment requests. And, typically the most that we can usually fund is 3, maybe 4, because typically sometimes one of them is in the water department, but, 3 is usually tops. And so they just keep getting pushed over to the next year. And they do have, quite a large inventory of equipment.
Yep. And for the highway department, that was, I believe, David was prioritizing the loader as his number 1 request.
Actually, I did speak with him, and in the memo, I think they're listed in that order, but I think the order of his priority, it's a little bit off to what they're listed as. So I did confirm with him what the order of priority was. And actually it's the one that I have is 1B.
Right, the 88.
That is the number 1 for him.
All right, so I would say that would definitely be number 9 for us then.
That sounds good.
And what was his second highest request?
And then the next one is the 1E, which is the holder.
And that's for the sidewalk, yep.
And then number 3 is the loader.
All right, let's put that 11 for now. We might need to move those around. We need to ask to go through my list some more.
Yep. Once we kind of go through these 2, I can resort them, and then we can kind of take a look to see if the order still fits.
Thank you. So let's go on down into for school or for IT, the annual computer hardware upgrade.
Yes, and I mean that's certainly important, but that is one item just to keep in mind that can wait until the fall. It should still be ranked.
We'll put that on a hold right now.
But it's not as pressing.
We also had the online permitting system, Permitize.
Yeah, so that's that is also important. However, it is competing with a lot of things for spring that to Davis's joke that's more real than humor. Improving the usability of our permitting system is a great and important development tool, but it doesn't necessarily leapfrog over buildings and emergency apparatus. So I think that if to the extent we can, it should be a priority for the town to invest in this in the fall. I don't think it can be. So I would ask the committee to consider assigning a priority number to it, but I do think there's other items on this list that are a higher priority for spring.
Thank you. We'll move forward then. So how are you ranking the water treatment pieces? As this is moving forward, do we ever need to rank?
So those are enterprise funded along with the sewer, which is sewer surplus. So the committee typically categorizes those as O for other because those don't have the scarcity of funding that our general would. Those will be moving forward in our high. Sure. Oh boy. Anyone know? So
Nice.
as everyone on this call probably received, you probably got a PFAS mailer this weekend. So it's something we've been working on for some time. And so that is a high priority to keep that moving and fund that, which is just shy of 10 million, as well as Red Mill Road, which is 15 million. Water plant we've been working on for a long time. So collectively,
I just have a quick question. How are we, because I work with PFAS contamination system, so do we have a company that we already hired, and how do we plan to address it, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. So we are working with Environmental Partners Group for, we already have an appropriation in place along with DEP grant funding for the PFAS preparedness engineering study, which we've now as recently amended that contract to include advancing us to bid documents for construction. We will be looking at 3 separate water treatment plants, likely to be granular active carbon, although I think there's still a little bit more design to be done in order to meet the DEP's new regulation of 20 part per trillion standard on 6 PFAS and PFOAs. And those would be kind of Murphy's Law here. We have 7 wells in Easton. The 3 that have hit over that regulation are not located close enough that we could just build 1 plant and we have to build 3. So that's what that will be for. So we've already lined up and started spending the engineering funds with environmental partners to get us ready to forward. And if town meeting approves the funding for this, then we'll get to work on bidding and constructing them, hopefully have them done in 18 months.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
And on those treatment plants, is our goal to meet the standard, or is our goal going to be trying to get those levels down as low as possible?
I mean, the goals will be to get it as low as possible. PFAS is very difficult to completely eliminate. We will make sure that it is at least compliant with the regulatory standard to remove as much as humanly possible. With the other plant, the iron and manganese plant for Red Mill Road, that well actually doesn't have PFAS at either a detectable or a regulatory issue level, but we will be including as part of that to future-proof in case that changes. The plant will be designed in a way that there will be physical space for us to incorporate PFAS filtration systems in that plant down the road if we have to.
Thank you, Connor, for the update.
Does that answer your question, Colin?
Yeah, it does. I knew that we were making extra capacity at the new site, so that was good. But I can't remember if I read, heard, or something else that somebody put in PFAS systems, and their results was much better than they expected. So
I would hope to see that. I just would be hesitant to overpromise earlier on. But this new standard is now, as of April 1st, applies to everyone Easton size water divisions of 10 to 50,000 customers. Most of them are doing their first tests now. You're going to see this spread throughout the state. Ripsa, you probably know this better than me if you work with this. This is going to be a probably $1 trillion infrastructure crisis on the national level. It is unfortunate, but PFAS is nearly ubiquitous in a lot of our environments because it was such a commonly used chemical in so many consumer products. It's actually still used in many consumer products that are outside the regulatory reach of the DEP's water program. So we're moving as quickly as we can. We joined a class action lawsuit against 3M and DuPont last summer with the Water Association, and we'll be installing at the Water Division shortly. The goal is to execute a contract Monday for a distribution site at the Water Division of PFAS filtered water for anyone in town who would like to fill all water into built. So that should be.
Is there I don't know if there is a plan in place, like for the residents to know like which well they're getting their water from and if that well has high PFAS?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so we've put online a map of where all of our wells are. So if you go to our website, go to the water division page, we have a borderline overwhelming amount of information about PFAS up there at this point. But we include a GIS map of where the wells are located, along with the testing results for every single one of our wells going back to 2019. The challenge is that our system blends based on demand. So we can't tell somebody in good faith that because they are farther away from Station 4 on Gary Lane, for example, that they could never have water from that well. It really depends on how active wells are, which again, Murphy's Law, just because of the location of this, one of the solutions, the immediate term solutions that some communities are able to leverage is just shut a well off, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of dispersed. So it's wells 1 and 4 for now that are over 20. And out of 7 wells, if you do crude back of the envelope math, you could say, well, 5 out of 7 are under 20, then on average, they probably, perhaps the water is, as a general rule, but it would be inappropriate of us to try to guarantee that. That said, we have.
There is no way we can close those 2 wells up and like
No.
use the 5 wells to supply water?
It's not possible. We're actually going to have water restrictions being voted on the 26th because we are already over our water permit from DEP. So shutting off other wells and increasing the draw on those other ones would only exacerbate that problem, unfortunately.
Got it.
So it's something we've been working on very hard with DEP and being forthright about that. If we had a simple thing we could do right away, believe me, we would. We would prefer to. The point of servicing we'll be installing is probably $50,000. The plants will be 10 million, but the costs just kind of are what they are. It's a new regulatory mandate. It's the right thing to do, and we're gonna do it as quickly as we can. And we will have these plants constructed probably years before most of our other neighbors have theirs built, because that is ultimately, even if you can turn the well offline, at some point you're gonna have to turn it back on. It's kind of a Band-Aid. We did have an in-home PFAS filter rebate program that we launched in 2019, but the DEP has pushed us to mothball that and move to this point of distribution site, because those filters are typically designed to the US EPA 70 part per trillion health advisory level.
Right.
They're not necessarily tested to 20 parts per trillion. So again, new regulation, we can't guarantee that it meets the DEP's new regs. So we'll move to a distribution site that does. So that should hopefully be available in a few weeks for folks until the plants are built.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Connor.
The priority of all that aside, since it's enterprise funded, usually the committee does just list them as other, so that we will be moving forward. Obviously, town meeting voters need to agree with that, but that will be in my capital proposal.
Thank you.
Other is for other source of funding.
So do we want to look at the flashing beacon, Connor, or did you have something in mind we should look at next for safety?
So Wendy reviewed the flashing beacon with Public Works, and I believe there's already some ground mounted flashing lights there. Wendy, is that accurate?
Yes, and this would be an overhead one, so there is already, flashing lights there. And this would only be sort of more of a stopgap measure. What's really needed is a signal there, which is a more significant capital investment.
Yeah, wasn't it on here too?
It is, and so the signal is listed as an estimated design of 350, and I'll be frank, that is not something we really have the capacity for in the immediate term. Typically, what we end up doing, particularly where state numbered routes intersect, is that we would use a portion of our state Chapter 90 funding every year to advance design incrementally over time, which is what we would probably do here. That makes it more budgetarily manageable, but that obviously takes time. So it's kind of a value call for the committee. The flashing beacon is a Band-Aid. However, that we can't afford the full fix right now. So that's something you would like to prioritize, you can.
I look towards our our police chief to tell us if that's something that would like to have us prioritize for safety reasons. If you're saying we already have a beacon there and it's doing its piece, and this is just a stopgap, I'd rather put money towards getting the engineering done and making a true solution. But any comments on that?
Aren't there funding available from the state? Because it's part of a state route, right? Can't we like get funding from the state for that signal design?
So that's a good question. And so in order for us to get state funding for what you would typically call a TIP, so that's a traffic improvement project through the regional planning agencies. If you look at the Depot Street job that a lot of folks may not want the traffic on, that's actually funded. That's a $10 million job funded by exactly that suggestion, Rupsa. But that requires, the way the deal works is the town has to pay for, usually you got to pay for the design yourself. So you pay for the design. And in the long run, it ends up being a good return on investment, right? Depot Street, we probably spent 1 or 2 million between design, land takings, things like that, and we're getting a $10 million construction job. That took a decade. And it competes with a dozen plus other municipalities. There's finite federal and state dollars that make their way through the process. DPW, our DPW director and assistant town engineer are on that traffic planning committee for the region, and they are quite successful. They, on a per capita basis, do bring more regional funding to Easton than our population would indicate. But it's highly, highly, highly competitive. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes. There's a process for that. It takes a long time, and the first part of it is we usually have to front the design. So what we try to fund that design out of Chapter 90 incrementally over time. Just because if 350 is the totality of what we receive from the Commonwealth for annual road funds is roughly 700. So that would be a sizable chunk. None of this means it's not worthy and doesn't need doing. It's just unfortunately there's just so many different needs. So that's again kind of a value question. From a committee, from a financial perspective, realistically, I do not think the town has the capacity when we have other needs like a fire truck that we need to borrow for, to borrow for that this year in spring or fall. So then it's really a question of do you want to prioritize a small $25,000 investment as a stopgap, or just hold off until we have a better.
Especially since we also have another vehicle for inspectional services we need to look at as well for the same type of pricing.
The other item that was on this list is the parking lot resurfacing. And if I remember correctly, are these the parking lots of the police station, the schools that have all the potholes? Did that not get done? I mean, once again, safety issue, lawsuit issue, whatever it might be. Some of those holes at the schools were pretty darn big.
Yes, so and that is something that we do think needs to be a priority this year, because you are correct. A lot of these facility lots are really, really hurting, that's but public buildings. You have emergency apparatus leaving them. You also have the school access. So I think that's farther, or I don't know if my list is the same. I think Wendy might have it highlighted. It does.
That would be about 9, correct? Keeping up.
So the last number
Or 10,
was 11,
11, gotcha.
the loader,
Okay.
so we could make that 12.
Yep.
Anybody think that should be higher? Is it more important than a loader, or it's a little more expensive than a loader?
I'm fine moving it down to 11.
You want to make, okay, I make the loader 12.
Yes, please.
I mean, just a suggestion. I'm just thinking safety.
Yep.
I agree with you.
I mean, I can tell you like the pavement management road funding, we're not gonna be able to do that. So, that one I know for sure. I mean, so I'm okay if we even defer it and not rank it, or if you wanna rank it, I would rank it near the end, or we can just, label it as a deferral.
I'd certainly would want this deferral for the fall if possible.
Cause I would not even, some of these things will, even if they're prioritized, will get deferred to the fall. But Connor, I just don't see that we're gonna have funding for this.
We're not. So again, this is something we really want to be investing in, but the borrowing strategy of $500,000 per year was a stopgap to supplement. So, we kind of spoke to it. Colin's gonna be unhappy with me because he knows where this is going, but we, just like chapter 70, which is a state account for operations that has been has increased, but marginally. You're talking 1%, 2%, a couple of zeros following severe cuts. Chapter 90 is a state funding program that goes to 351 towns in Massachusetts and has not actually increased at all. So that hasn't even had those like worse than inflation increases of 1%. It's actually just been level funded with 1 or 2 off years for years and years and years and years and years. And anyone here who has any cursory touch towards the construction market knows that, what you could buy in 2008 compared to today is not in the same universe. And the same goes for our roads. So state funding has been level for many, 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 many years, and it's not enough for us to adequately maintain, let alone improve our road system. So for quite a few years, I think maybe starting in fiscal 2014 or thereabouts, we began what was intended to be a kind of temporary stopgap measure of borrowing $500,000 a year to give DPW some of the flexibility they need to make some progress and make some good road improvements for a few years. But we at this time are not necessarily going to keep doing this because you borrow $500,000 a year and that adds up pretty fast. And it's not something we can afford to do every year. So unfortunately, absent more recurring revenue, right? You think about roads need money every single year. It's not like it's a fire truck that comes up every 4 or 5 years or an ambulance. This is something we know we need every single year. We simply just don't have a recurring funding to do it. So the borrowing was a stopgap. And it would unfortunately just not really be fully fiscally responsible, although it's not ideal under either circumstance to just continue to borrow that. So I think a deferral for now is reasonable. I just want to be fully transparent with the committee that we're not suggesting deferral and we think we could do it in the fall. It's more likely than not we can.
Have we looked at the green communities grants where the state funds to build sustainable roads and that are more environment friendly?
Yep.
Have we looked at applying to those grants?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and we have. And Easton was one of the first green communities designated in Bristol County, and we've actually received so many of those grants that we have been put to the back of the line to give everyone else a chance. We've been
Do we apply them every year? I think we can apply them every year, right?
We do, and we have received between 1 and 200,000+ every year for many years in a row. I think we're nearing 1 million at this point. DPW manages that. They've done a great job. We've done things like HVAC replacements for community centers. I was involved in the LED streetlight conversion when we purchased and converted our streetlights to LEDs to save a significant amount of money every year from utilities and reduce our carbon footprint.
Right.
We do leverage those funds aggressively. We actually, in general, are quite successful with grant receipts in Easton because, as you are seeing, our recurring revenue options are not great. So we need to prioritize those things, and we do. So yes, we do go after and usually receive annually Green Communities funds.
Okay, cool. I was just curious.
It's a great question.
The other thing that I had on my list was the municipality facility capital improvements, which we're always deferring, cutting in half, doing whatever. I know with construction costs right now, up 180%. I don't know what 200,000 is going to get us, but I don't. We need to protect the facilities that we have right now, so they don't go into further disrepair. But Connor, Wendy, I don't know where we stand on municipal facility capital improvements, if you have any insight on that.
Sure. Another good question, a really good point. Out of the gate, I agree with you. We ideally would be spending more. This is a similar conversation as the one about roads, right? We know we need to be spending, we need a higher recurring capital spend on our facilities. I think we will probably try to fund some of this. Let me find it. In spring, perhaps half, to your point. I believe there's a little bit left in a previous appropriation. And again, that's just an ability to pay, not a reflection that it's not valuable. I think what we've had some flexibility with HVAC work thanks to CARES. So one of the federal COVID bills can leverage some ventilation and improvements that help minimize the spread of COVID. So that obviously has a externality, a positive side effect that improves it for everything. So we've been trying to leverage those funds where we can. This ties into another item that is here, the fire, police, DPW facility feasibility, because really where we are heading, and DPW Director Dick important implementation building committee, I believe 2 years ago now, quantifying and itemizing really significant municipal facilities needs, as Colin, you're referencing, and we should continue to make improvements and maintenance investments where we can, but certain things, no matter how much those annual borrows, are not going to kind of affect that. Our police, fire, and DPW facilities are overwhelmingly antiquated and too small and don't meet current codes for environmental regulation. So the long term is that we will have to, much like we have through the school process, thankfully we have the MSBA, which gives significant amounts of money to offset those capital costs for school building projects. We're going to need to be seriously grappling with in the next few years municipal facilities. We go after other funds where we can. So town hall will be getting a nice renovation to the exterior and preservation through CPA funds, which is great. It's a great use of it. It's the most used historic resource in the community. But you can't use things like CPA for public works, police, and fire. So one of the items you have on your capital list is the feasibility study for a future joint facility at $200,000. The good news is we have identified another funding source, which is that a affordable housing proposal for Union Street. The developer has agreed as part of the mitigation of that to fund upon assuming they receive a permit from the zoning board, which they haven't sought yet, but if they make it through that process, they would contribute $250,000 to the town to get that feasibility study funded, which is important because the long term of what we are going to need is new facilities. So it's been quite some time. The youngest municipal building is older than me, and some of that's okay. Town hall's a century old, and it's not going anywhere. We're going to keep it in good shape through CPA, and that's fine. But the police, you look at Lothrop Street, that was built in the 60s. DPW, I think, was over many years, 50s and 60s. The facilities are just not adequate. We can't fit our fleets in them. We can't clean them to the standard DEP wants for stormwater management. So, we will continue to fund what we can through the $100,000 to $200,000 request to supplement what we do in house. But we're reaching a point of end of life with some of these buildings that we will need to replace them. And so one of the ways to do that is a feasibility study to get that conversation moving and have that analysis performed. And thankfully we'll wind up some funding for that so that capital doesn't need to make a value judgment on do you pay for that or a loader.
Connor, I have a question again. So I know that through my job that a lot of communities apply through MVP planning grants provided by the state of Mass. And through MVP planning grant, we can actually get money for these feasibility studies. And by applying for action grants, we can actually get these projects funded. So I was looking at it, and Easton, of course, is eligible to be an MVP certified community, part of just being one of the towns in Mass. And our last planning grant probably was from 2018. But we help, like, as part of my job, I help towns all the time to get these fundings because we just read about this kind of, like, any environmental related, it's a municipality vulnerability preparedness program. So we can apply for the planning grants, and then I think we have to shell some money out of our pocket, but government funds a significant amount of it. And then followed by we apply for the action grants, and through action grants, we can actually get those projects funded.
Right.
So have we considered this, or do you have any plans to consider this?
Yes, we have. We were one of the first MVPP communities in Massachusetts. We received the planning grant funding years ago, conducted the community planning process there, and we've already received and applied the action grants as well. We did a roughly $250,000 job to do wetlands restoration and floodplain restoration by removing cement structures on public lands that would help with groundwater recharge. And our offset was in-kind contributions of labor from engineering staff, planners, and DPW. So it's a great program, and we are on that and have leveraged that as well.
So do you think we can do that again, maybe for this feasibility study, for example, we can actually apply for the planning? I think we can do that every year. Towns are eligible to apply for it every year. And I know the companies, they just kind of do every work. They write the report for you. All you have to do just get in touch or get bids from different companies. Right. So they do the job for you. They just interview a few of the heads from different departments. You have gone through this, so you know all about it. So I was wondering, if you can do that every year, then there is a kind of a constant source of money through Commonwealth.
Sure. So I don't know off the top of my head if you can do it every single year, but I'll check with planning. They're pretty aggressive with those grants, and if that's something we can leverage, we certainly will. But for now, as far as to this instant example of this joint public works, public safety facility, we do already have an executed contract.
Yeah, you said that here, right?
So yes, another good program. You seem like you know a lot of these, which is great. And I'm happy that so far the answer is yes, we've done that. It's a lot better than saying no. We were unaware any of these things exist. But
no, I was sure you are aware of this. I was just making sure maybe we can do that again and get more funding through the process.
Yeah, I'll double check with planning. It's a good question. There's other programs like Housing Choice. Again, we were one of the first housing choice communities in Massachusetts. We received $225,000, I think in 2018, to support the design funding for the Five Corner Sewer Project, which is now complete. We actually just received an award 2 or 3 weeks ago for local design funds for a TIP project. So we were talking about how do we get those things off the ground.
Yeah, I know there are those projects available. You're right. And I just remember MVP, you're eligible every 5 years, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we'll have a cool. So we just implemented the action grant. I think within the past 12 months.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I'm sorry. Does that? I know I went down a rabbit hole there, but does that get to some of the concern about the facilities funding?
Yes, it does, because I know, it's been a battle every year. Like you said, we might be able to fund half, and, I guess we can do that. And I just wanted to say, not everything from the 60s needs to be replaced, but I feel the age of those buildings.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, some of it, that's, we have a woodworking shed from the 1800s that is still used.
And I think he's talking about members of the board.
I know. I was being diplomatic about addressing that.
I think I was talking about myself. Yeah.
All right. If I can swerve us back onto the requirements that are in front of us for prioritization. Last one I have is facility parking lot resurfacing. Do we want to put the actual capital improvements next, or do we need to skip that based on what you will say, Connor?
You're speaking about municipal facilities capital improvements.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's fair to prioritize it at this point. I will, the prioritization and funding are kind of separate, but obviously Wendy and I do our best to align those things and track with the committee's priorities. So we do think it's important to at least partially fund that, so
So I believe we should put that at 13, Wendy, unless I have anyone that has other thoughts.
You can see the spreadsheet, right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I have two screens, so I can't really tell, if that's what's being displayed to you.
Mhm.
Because all my tiles of everybody's faces is on my other screen, so just wanna be sure.
You should have like a yellow or red line around what's being displayed. We can discuss after. All right,
On my screen, but
let's
Software
see.
upgrade we didn't get yet.
I'm sorry, Colin.
I said that's probably in the software upgrade that we haven't funded yet.
No, those are free, so we're lucky. I can talk to you to that after. So, going through the remaining items on our list. There's some low hanging fruit. I don't know if we need to talk about the technology. There's two pieces from them: the server upgrade that's needed, as well as the ongoing computer hardware based on what were they saying? They had to replace all their other laptops.
Yep, so Infotech, so the annual hardware software we've been doing in the fall, I think Wendy, the idea is we would defer that again till the fall, although it is still, it's a priority, we plan to fund it, same with the server upgrade.
Okay, so defer. Okay,
yep,
defer
so
fall.
we would defer to the fall, so I would still rank it, but it does not need to be as high a priority.
Thank you.
Some other things too that I think are worth looking at are the rooftop units, the replacement of the rooftop unit and the compressor.
Yep. Now, would that fall under any chance for the COVID funds we might be getting based on compressors?
So we are going to see what we have left in our funding. It's kind of a moving target because the CARES money that we got, some of those expenses that you could charge to CARES are reimbursable through FEMA. So we're trying to apply to FEMA first, but they are pushing back on some things. So once we get a better sense of how much money we have left, we'll be able to determine if these will be able to be funded, through that grant. That's definitely what we're aiming for, to try to get those, through CARES money or other stimulus money. I mean, because as you know, we still don't know what all the rules are going to be for spending the next stimulus monies that come in.
Thank you. And if I remember correctly, Wendy, the compressor in the old gym wasn't working properly. So that should be the next ranking, then the continuing replacement.
Yes, so and I am happy to recommend making that one number 14. I would also recommend doing the rooftop units at RO as 15, if
Makes sense, and if we get funding, we can deprioritize.
The other one that I was thinking here for inspectional services. Previously, they had requested 2 vehicles. Did we fund one of those? It's down further, down.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
We did fund one last year, I believe, and this is for new employee, I believe.
Okay.
Yes,
so
so that's been being requested for a couple of years. One was funded in the prior year. Although I do think, and Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, this is something that the current vehicle is 13 years old and rusting out, and it's really not, it's past its useful life. So this is a relative priority for inspectional staff to have this.
yes, it's definitely way past its useful life. It's 2008. It's a Ford Ranger. They have 4 vehicles for that department. We've replaced 2 of them. This will still leave the 2008 Ford Ranger and a 2011 Ford Ranger. The 2011 is in much better shape, and the inspector believes that he could get possibly another 4 to 5 years out of that one. So if we're able to fund this one, that will really, keep him in good shape for the, next 4 to 5 years.
All right, so that would be 16.
Now we're back to the expensive equipment.
Yeah, the only other low hanging fruit was the school furniture, the computers for the schools, which was a high ticket item. I don't know if that's, again, under CARES funding at all, since they had those were handing out Chromebooks to all the students.
So Wendy, I think, can you find the schools, please, for Tech 1, 2, I think we're referring to?
Yes, actually, what I was gonna do is I was going to resort this based on what we've done so far. Just so I think that will
Yep. So,
I think that will be helpful.
mhm.
So that's everything so far. So this is basically
What's left?
what's left.
Not,
It takes up more than one screen.
not after, well, wait a minute. How far, does this include things not even proposed funding for fiscal 22? If you scroll down further?
It does, yes. It goes into it scrolls up to 23, 24, etc. So
We need to get through row 47.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, that's the end of it. I will say, like with DPW, we could rank these, or honestly, like after those other three that were the top ones, I just don't see how we would get the money to fund these. So I'm okay with either putting a ranking on them or putting a deferral on them.
I probably wanted to defer right now because I know we don't have the money for this right now.
Yeah.
So did we covered elsewhere, Wendy, the replacement of a 1970 forklift? Is that already covered?
That has not been addressed yet. That's right here. Yeah, this forklift is actually
42 years old.
a 1970 forklift. It's pretty old.
So that sounds like a safety issue to me.
It would be helpful if we could replace that.
Yes.
All right, so that would be 17 for right now until we go through our numbers again.
Okay. ADA transition plan, I mean, that is certainly important. We are looking to possibly do some funding in the fall. There is some funding currently left over from a previous authorization. And also this is something that can be done. It's not like one particular thing, it's a lot of different things that can be done, and some of which can be funded out of the DPW budget. So that's why we'd be looking to put that off into the fall, but I would certainly, be, welcome making this one next. But we'd probably do some sort of funding in the fall. Certainly $100,000 is going to be a lot of money. Would probably be some kind of partial funding.
What about grants for that? Is there any grant money left around to fund any of those projects or studies?
For the ADA transition plan?
Correct.
Occasionally, we are able to secure funds, occasionally through, I think the Office of Disability Services on a statewide level. I think we've secured some funding that is relative to this. I can't remember the awarding authority, but I believe for things like the accessibility ramp improvements at Frothingham Hall were grant funded. So to the extent we can, yes, we So frequently, as you've all heard a lot tonight, are familiar with some of these particularly larger ticket items, we would still prioritize them and still seek the authorization from town meeting to borrow to fund them if necessary, but concurrent to that, we pursue grants. And so if we do get a grant that offsets that, then we just don't issue the bond and we rescind the debt at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a priority. I think we should make this next, but sort of like the capital improvement, you know, if we can fund certain projects and not others, you know, not the full 100, sure that would make, check some things off our list. I just don't know that we're gonna have 100 for it. But
Mhm.
that's why we have you two. You can figure it out.
Very good. All right, so what do we want to do next?
So are we gonna put a D under the information technology or leave those open?
I think we'll leave those open because the information technology is something that we need to fund that.
Well, that just starts building up very, very fast if we don't fund that.
Mhm.
I'll need it more than ever now. Similarly, if you look at Tech 1 and 2 for schools, that's something that is a priority, but we are going to explore with the schools, Wendy, I believe, you know, if we could tap other funding sources, particularly any federal relief. But
Yes.
all of those technology items, both the 2 from Info Tech and the 2 Tech for schools are likely not able to be funded in spring, but if the committee is willing, should probably still be on the prioritization list.
I agree wholeheartedly. If we're gonna just go down from the IT itself in the school IT 19, 20, 21, and 22, going directly down.
I would agree. I got my information technology and then the school technology mixed up there.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
sorry.
There you go. Yep, thank you.
Very good.
So
So that,
And
we go.
furniture next.
Let's go up. What do we skip? We skipped the. Beacon. Do we need to rank the feasibility study, or Connor, are we just deferring that?
Wendy, I think we still want to put that on a rank list, even right, even though we're
I would rank that.
okay.
Then I definitely want to put that next to this.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Turnpike signal, should that be a defer?
Were we talking about the 350,000?
Yes.
So from a financial perspective, the likelihood we have the bandwidth to borrow 350 for that this year is vanishingly small.
In the GIS fund metric updates, when was the last time we did that overview or overlay, I should say, on the town?
I'm not sure we did the last one, but I know there is going to be another flyover like this spring, summer.
Yeah.
So this is something that would more likely, we would look at, you know, potential funding in the fall versus for the annual town meeting.
Okay. And is it the goal to update that every year, every 5 years? I can't remember when we did it. I remember when we originally bought it, but I can't remember how long ago that was.
It's been at least 2 years.
I could look that up. It's been several years. It's definitely not every year.
Okay.
I feel like it could be 5 years at this point.
Yeah, I know. I think I just moved to my house here on Greystone. It's been a long time.
Okay, so do we want, so you have a suggestion for number 24?
So let's make the GIS 24. Are we deferring I think we're deferring turnpike signal design at this point.
I think we're gonna have to.
Yep.
Okay.
And
And the permit eyes, are we deferring that to the fall? Do we want that ranked?
I think we should rank it, right?
Yes, I would rank that.
And then make that 25 then. But
And what about the flashing beacon?
I'd rather go to the carpets for the school. I know.
That's. And as far as the heavy equipment that has been requested from the DPW, there's nothing else that we think we're gonna be able to fund? Should we rank those or not?
I believe
put
you,
3 through.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're recommending or prioritizing 3 and the other 3 are listed as defer for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Okay, so we could make these next school items next. I will say, if at all possible, they're looking at potentially being able to fund this out of their budget. But I would still prioritize it.
Yep, I would definitely go to carpets 26, the furniture 27.
Then there's the VCT tiles.
Excuse me, let's make the tile
Well,
27.
actually, I think I made that 27.
Yep.
That seems like
Yep.
more of a priority than the carpets, but
Yep,
okay.
yep. And then 28 for the furniture.
Okay. Good.
Did we miss anything up further up, or did we cover it all?
The beacon, the flashing beacon.
So that's 29.
That looks like it, so I will just resort this. Too far. Shoot. Oh. Sorry,
No worries.
I have to re-highlight.
As long as we don't hear you say oops, we're good.
Let go of my mouse too soon.
As long as you saved it already.
Yep. Okay, so.
All right, so if we just do a quick walkthrough of our rankings, making sure we don't move anything around. So just starting at the top, we have ranking 1 as the fire engine. Let's see, 2 is the boot cleaner. Do we want to move that down based on hopefully getting funding for that? Move it to, move the police vehicle up to 2.
I would agree with that.
The animal control to 3.
You wanna make
And
that one 4? You can still move it.
yeah, let's make the helmet cleaner 5 and make the utility vehicle 4, unless anyone else has strongest sentiments for that.
It's good to me.
Okay. And then we have the floor. The floor finishing was just for slippage issues. I'm trying to remember. I apologize.
That was the epoxy flooring, but I'm the same as you, Harris. I can't remember if those were the metal and the breaking, the falling concrete and the rest of the stuff that was an issue as well, and that was all part of the program.
I think Wendy, correct me wrong, I think that was already corrected. Were those grates fixed already at the fire department, at the fire station? And this is just for the floor finishing itself?
I think this is just for the floor finishing. I'm just looking to pull up that memo.
Yeah.
The memo says epoxy floor finishing, 49,000 for refinishing of the concrete floor at Fire Station 3 on Bay Road. Also to include the cleaning and replacing of the angle iron and concrete at the edges of the door, which have corroded and rusted over the years.
Yeah,
That was
okay.
all at once. I did remember correctly.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So 6 is that, 7 is the fitness center
Yeah, I feel like the fitness center and the security should be higher up on the list.
So let's do that. So let's move that to, let's see, how, you wanna move the, where are we now? Yeah, so you wanna do the boots further down, since that's being funded anyways,
Yeah.
we can, let's move the fitness center to, because that's the actual repair that needs to happen to,
5.
yeah, move that to 5, thank you, Colin, I was just trying to get my numbers straight again. Move that to 5, move the security improvements to 7. And then move the boot cleaner to 8.
Very good.
Any other comments from anyone else that I'm missing something? Okay, continuing downward, we have the, thank you. We have the hook lift, the sidewalk tractor, do we need to move the parking lot up based on safety issue? Should we make that 9?
I
and then-
remember that being pretty darn bad.
Right, so let's, if we could, let's move that to 9 and then go 10 and 11 for the 2. Yeah, for 10, thank you. 11, 12. We then had the municipal facilities capital improvements. I think we should probably move the compressor in the old gym up above facilities improvements, since that's something that needs to happen, I believe. So we can switch those 13, 14. Thank you. And to be honest, we probably want to move the pickup truck to 15 and the capital improvements to 16. And then we have the forklift, which also needs to be replaced. Do we need to move that to 16 and? Yeah, I think we need to move that to 16 and try to get that safety issue replaced and move the municipal down to 17. Okay, continuing down, we have the ADA transition plan at 18, the computer hardware at 19, the server upgrade and the 2 technologies for the school at 21 and 22, the feasibility study at 23, the GIS at 24, the permit eyes at 25. So the actual floor, maybe we should the floor be moved up to 23, since technically it's a safety issue if it doesn't get done?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So let's make that 23, and then I'm sorry, Wendy.
No,
And then it goes 20, there goes 24, 25. 26, 27, okay.
Do we want to move the carpets up there as well under the VC tiles, because that's a safety issue?
I was thinking
Yeah.
about that too.
Because I
Yes.
remember the rips, the tears, the duct tape,
Yep.
the tripping hazard.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, that leaves 28 at the furniture, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, and 29 at the flashing beacon. And the rest is deferred, or,
Good.
Wendy, you can write one more story, thank you.
Deferred and then other. Oh, let me just show that now. Okay, I can. Can hide some of that to
Thank you.
see it better.
And what's the total funding that we have prioritized at this point in time?
So if you do not include, so if you leave the enterprise funds out of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Please do that. There we go. So it's 3,336,554.
I believe, but this includes things that we think will
Right.
likely be spread out over spring and fall town meeting. And whether we can fund every single one of those would still be open.
Correct, so like,
Right.
Wendy, if you go
Kind of
up,
get an idea.
Sure.
Wendy, if you go back up again, so if we got like, what was it, 216 done? Was that where,
So 1 through 16,
yes, 1 through 16.
that's number 23. So 2,193,000.
Okay,
Yeah. So if you look back, the capital budget put forward in the fall last year, Wendy and I made a table of requested, funded, unfunded, and funding ratio of capital budgets going back from to fiscal 15, and the 5-year or 6-year average of fiscal 15 through 20 was general fund requests of roughly 3.2 million with a fund level of 2.15 million. So 2.19 is pretty on the money for what has been prioritized and funded out of the general fund.
I mean, we do have the fire engine too, which is a definitely a big ticket item.
Unnecessary item.
Yes.
so Connor, since I think we've completed our prioritization, is there anything else we need to do for you to help you move this forward?
Wendy, I believe the answer is no, except for me to say thank you. This is a long meeting and it's very kind of detailed oriented and going through spreadsheets. And I know you had a lot of presentations made too throughout the season, so I appreciate that as always. From here, I believe you all gave input. The committee should vote the capital prioritization list as presented. And from there, I think, Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, what I need to put a capital budget forward next week, which will go to
Yes.
meeting in May.
Thank you very much, Connor. So does anyone have any comments or questions before I ask for a motion? Hearing none, may I have a motion on our prioritization list?
I'll make a motion to accept the priority list as we've discussed in order 1 through 29.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will ask for a roll call. Give me 1 second when I get to the top of my roll. Now let's go down my list. Nightingale,
Nightingale, yes.
Condon,
Condon, yes.
Roy,
Yes.
McCarthy,
Yes.
Healy,
Healy, yes.
and Blumwald, yes. That's unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
If,
And the next item I had was meeting minutes, but I don't believe I received any, Wendy.
no, I don't think, yeah, I think we have to get those, we'll get those for the next meeting.
Sounds good. Any notes or updates, Wendy, that we need to move forward with?
Well, I would just like to say, so at the beginning of our meeting, so we all introduced ourselves, but I just wanted to mention, people might be wondering who Roseanne is, and Roseanne is our recording secretary, so she does all the minutes for the committee, and has been doing that for the last
2 years now?
2 years, I think.
You're muted, Roseanne.
She must be on the dreaded double mute.
There we go. I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know if it's my headset or coming out of my laptop. Yeah,
headset.
so I've been taking minutes for the capital planning committee and the audit committee for, gosh, I think it's going on 3 years now, Wendy. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think it is 3 years now.
Yeah. Getting better with every meeting.
So,
But thank you.
Thank you, Roseanne, for all you do for us.
Oh, you're welcome.
that's all I have for
Okay.
updates.
Yeah.
I think at this point, we're good to go. I would not anticipate that we would need to necessarily meet again until possibly the fall, and probably only if there are any changes to, whatever we prioritized and what's going to be put forward at town meeting, if there's any changes to dollar amounts or things like that.
Great. Sounds good, Wendy. Hearing no other new business, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
And a second, please.
Yeah.
All right.
Second.
And thank you, sir. And one last roll call for approval. Nightingale,
Nightingale, yes.
Condon,
Condon, yes.
McCarthy,
Yes.
Roy,
Yes.
Healy,
Haley, yes.
Bloomwald, yes, and Connor, thank you for your time this evening as well.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, Wendy, as well.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.